A new ESPN article lists Jake Retzlaff as a consistently consistent quarterback. It doesn't feel like it's enough for BYU to accomplish what they hope to accomplish this season.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, executive producer at the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake City and 13-year credentialed media member at BYU. I am your resident BYU expert and insider. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And thank you to all of you who like to call our everydayers right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Get started today with FanDuel and get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. Go to FanDuel.com to get started today. All right, coming up on today's show, we're going to talk about Jake Retzlaff and where he fits in the pantheon of all FBS Division I quarterbacks, according to ESPN, and why I think it's actually the wrong spot for him to be in. Then we're going to talk about a new commitment to the BYU football program that should give the next quarterback, whether it's Bear Bachmeier or somebody else, another weapon to throw the ball to. And we'll finish up today's show with, is college football going the way of every other professional sport? Well, yeah, but this is a new development in that evolution. All right, let's talk about Jake Retzlaff and the BYU quarterback situation. And ESPN did a really interesting piece. They ranked all 136 FBS quarterback situations into tiers ahead of the 2025 football season. There are something like 16 or 17 different tiers they broke this down into. And in tier 7, you have to scroll down a little bit, you will find the tandem, as they list, of Jake Retzlaff and Bear Bachmeier. Curious, they did not list guys like a McKay Hillstead or a Trayson Bourget here, but they are projecting that the 4-star transfer, speaking of Bear Bachmeier, coming to BYU is apparently, they believe, the heir apparent at that position. But the point they make with these tiers is they believe that this group, it's 16 different players across, I think it's 8 different programs here. Actually, no, it's 7 different programs, excuse me, that they are calling them, quote, consistently consistent. They say this: the term, quote, game manager, unquote, gets thrown around a lot in QB analysis. It's often used in place of the term, quote, average, unquote. That's an unfair descriptor for these players who are game managers, more in a sense of doing all the little things it takes them to give their teams a chance to win without often hogging much of the spotlight in the process. They're very good. They're just probably not going to emerge as superstars. Okay. Interesting breakdown there. But as they point out about Jake Retzlaff last year as a quarterback, they listed him as the two things they've noted is that when Jake Retzlaff went up against top 40 defenses, his numbers, not great. A 50 QBR, 55% completion percentage, 4 touchdowns against 6 interceptions, 7.0 yards per dropback against those top 40 defenses, which the Big 12 boasts a handful of that they will go up against this coming season. As they mentioned, against all others, his QBR goes up to 74.2. His completion percentage jumps by more than 5 points, 60.1 completions, 16 touchdowns against 6 interceptions, and 8.0 yards per dropback. So a noted increase in the overall production against non-top 40 defenses. So that is a concern if you're a Cougar fan who's looking at this coming season and thinking, okay, what's it going to take for BYU to get over that hump and make a run at the college football playoff? Well, you got to see Jake Retzlaff's numbers against all others become what he does against top 40 defenses and the like. He's got to do it against everybody. They also note this. Last season, 67.6% of Retzlaff's completions went for a first down or a touchdown, tops among all Power 4 QBs. That's pretty cool. 2/3 of his passes either went for 6 or moved the chains. That's something you can build on if your BYU's coaching staff obviously led in the offensive side of things by Aaron Roderick. I think that is something that you've got to key in on here if you're Jake Retzlaff. The other sense I get is him being listed in this group. As they mentioned, they don't believe these guys are going to emerge into being superstars. Well, here's the deal. Jake Retzlaff has got to take another step if BYU, truthfully, in my opinion, wants to be a Big 12 contender, if not a college football playoff contender this year. There have been so many ill-advised plays during his past 17 starts. He's got 17 career starts now across the past 2 seasons, obviously the 4 at the tail end of 2023 and the 13 a season ago. And mixed in with those as I call them, back-breaking plays, and I think every one of you can think of one. There's that fade route interception in the end zone against Kansas. There's the pick six against Oklahoma. There's a handful of them spread across those 17 starts. But there's also, in that breakdown, a lot of really star-making a potential in it. What BYU needs from Jake Retzlaff this season is they need that star-making potential to become the norm, much like what I talked about with these stats. Your QBR goes up by 24.2 points when it's not a top 40 defense. Well, guess what? Therein lies the issue about BYU becoming the type of team that A, can advance to the Big 12 title game, B, make the college football playoff, and if they should make it to the college football playoff, have a chance at advancing and potentially running towards a national title. Can Jake Retzlaff get to that level? That is the major question mark of this upcoming season. We are now 102 days away from BYU kicking off the season, and in the next 100 and so days, BYU is going to learn a lot, it feels like, about Jake Retzlaff, and obviously in the ensuing season, more so, what steps, what improvements he has made. I know, talking with people in and around the football program, they feel like Jake Retzlaff is very capable of taking that step, and if he is capable of taking that step, he's got to take that step, and he's got to take that step immediately once this season kicks off. BYU gets 3 relative breathers out of the gate. They face off against Portland State, they're home to Stanford, then they go to East Carolina. They should be 3-0 come the end of the non-conference portion of their schedule, heading in to that showdown against Colorado to kick off Big 12 play. If they're not, well, guess what? The whole tenor of the season, I think, will have completely flipped just a quarter of the way into this campaign. Jake has to be the man, and I believe that he has put in the time requisite going down to 3D QB and working with former BYU quarterback John Beck. He took a bunch of his teammates with them, guys like Carson Ryan, Chase Roberts, Parker Kingston. A lot of the weapons that are expected to be the guys he picks out when it comes to crunch time, they all went with him to Southern California. And if they truly have taken that next leap, this is a BYU team that's going to be oh so dangerous and really have that opportunity of being an upper echelon Big 12 team, if not the best team in the conference and a college football playoff contender. I know that everybody within the football program rues the opportunity they missed out on a season ago. Had they beaten either Kansas or Arizona State, and they were essentially, it feels like in those games in particular, I know that you obviously could take other plays the other way, but think about it, there's like really 3 plays in those 2 games against Kansas and against Arizona State. I think of the missed fade route interception in the end zone against Kansas, and obviously that the quick kick from Jalen Daniels that went off the helmet of Evan Johnson. Either one of those go the other way of BYU, they probably win that game, and they're probably finding themselves in the Big 12 title game. Then, a week later, had Jake Retzlaff been able to make that whole shot that he has made before to JoJo Phillips up that sideline, JoJo Phillips scores, and BYU pulls off an incredible comeback and beats Arizona State and once again punches their ticket to the Big 12 title game. That's how close they were a season ago, and I know that those plays and a bevy of others have stuck with them. I also can acknowledge that BYU was on the other side of good fortune in terms of plays that went their way against the likes of Utah, the likes of what happened against Baylor. They have had multiple games in their past season, going back to 2024, that went their way as well, being on the other side of one-score games. If BYU can get that good fortune back on their side this year, but more importantly, take that good fortune and essentially make their own luck, and what that means is go out there and make the plays requisite, they're going to make you win games by a more comfortable margin more often, that is where Jake Retzlaff needs to step forward and show that he is the guy, to use that expression, and show that he has seized this opportunity and he wants to etch himself into the lore of BYU quarterbacks of all time. There's a lot of good quarterbacks in that pantheon. Jake Retzlaff, opportunity to enter that pantheon, well, he knows what he's got to do, and that is to make a Big 12 title game and potentially run BYU to their first conference title in, what would that be? Well over a decade, maybe 2 decades. It's been a minute since BYU's been a conference champion, and that feels like it's got to be what Jake Retzlaff has got to deliver, if not a college football playoff berth. And he's going to have to emerge from being, as they say, consistently consistent to, I think, outright star for BYU to live that dream. All right, coming up next, we're going to flip over and talk a little bit about a new commitment to the BYU football program, Terrence Sarion. Who is he? What does he offer to the BYU Cougars? We'll talk about that next as you roll on right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing. The Western and Eastern Conference finals are about to begin, and every night is delivering highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. And the best part is, whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action and do it with our friends at FanDuel. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and during the action, which is live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. And the best part is, would it be more fun to have you watching a game that you're invested in but have even more riding on it with our friends over at FanDuel? And the best part is, how could $200 in bonuses bets add to the excitement of your first $5 bet hits? It's as simple as that, my friend. So get started today and get signed up with our friends at FanDuel. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet if you're a new customer. And if it wins, you get $200 in bonus bets. It's as simple as that. It doesn't got much more simple than what they have made it. The best part is the app is super simple and easy to use. So get started today once again with our friends over at FanDuel at FanDuel.com. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Hope you all have a fantastic Tuesday whenever you listen to this and or watch it. As always, please continue to subscribe, rate, review, share this with your family and friends, and help us continue to grow this audience. We are having an incredible banner year so far in 2025, and looking forward to making even better as we get closer and closer to the start of the BYU football and obviously the BYU basketball season. That's not that far off. The good news is for BYU going into 2026 recruiting, they are on an absolute roll right now. Yesterday, if you missed the news, BYU flipped the commitment of Terrence Serion from his hometown Washington Huskies, and he is going to be a BYU Cougar. Now, flipping a guy from a Big Ten program, that in and of itself is a really, really cool thing, and it shows that BYU, they've got prowess on the recruiting trail. The other thing about this is a hometown kid. He goes to Evergreen High School up there in Washington. Would have very easily been easy for him from Vancouver, Washington, to say, you know what, I'm going to rep for the Dogs, because Washington's got a really, really strong hold over the state of Washington. But it was good to see a guy like Terrence Serion decide that BYU is the best fit for him. Also got to give major plaudits to a guy like Kalani Sitake. When BYU issued this offer to Terrence Serion, I saw the offer go out. He announced it on social media, and I immediately pulled him up, just got a feel for what it was. And all of a sudden I look at it and say, this guy's committed to Washington. What's going on here? Well, that told me that BYU at least felt like they had a chance to get into Serion's ear and kind of sell him on what BYU could offer. Is he the biggest guy out there? No, they list him at 5'10", 5'11", between $160 and $170 in terms of weight. So he's not the biggest and beefiest wide receiver out there. But what you see when you turn on the film is you see a guy who is fearless, has really, really, I would say, polished route running ability. He maybe doesn't have the top end speed, because if he had top end speed, he'd be better than an 88 ranked prospect, a 3-star, according to 24/7 Sports. Now, an 88 is kind of the high end of the 3-star category. For those of you keeping track at home, it's actually getting close to a 4-star territory. But if he had that game breaking, let's say 4.4 type speed, he'd probably be a 4-star prospect, and everybody and their dog would be after him. But the nice part is BYU went into the Pacific Northwest, took a guy who had been committed to Washington since last season, going back to last fall, and convinced him that BYU is where he needs to be. The other thing that was in BYU's back pocket when it came to recruiting Serion, some guy named Brock Harris. Now you're thinking, okay, a guy from Evergreen High School in Vancouver, Washington, and a tight end prospect from Pineview High School in St. George, Utah. What's the connection here, Jake? Well, 24/7 Sports revealed it, that these two guys play on the same 7-on-7 squad. And oh, by the way, their other 7-on-7 teammates are a pair of twins that BYU wants very badly to flip in their own right for another Big Ten program. I'm talking about Keenan and Jaron Pula from Timpview High School. The twins from Timpview, who are really, really high-level defensive back / wide receiver prospects, much like a Terrence Serion. They all play on the same 7-on-7 squad. So could BYU pull off 3 flips from Big Ten programs on the West Coast and convince them all that they want to be BYU Cougars? That remains to be determined, but one of the 3 is already in, as Terrence Serion announced that he is, as he mentioned, quote, 1,000% committed, unquote. Now, he did flip from Washington, so how soon could he flip from BYU? That will always be a concern here. But I also acknowledge, looking at this is a guy who feels like he's tailor-made for what BYU's offense does for wide receivers. And what that means is He may not be the biggest guy on the field, nor the fastest guy on the field, but what he lacks in the explosive factor and probably the size factor, he makes up for in heart, in effort, and more importantly, with incredible route running ability. One thing that Fesi Sitake, Aaron Roderick, I think anybody else involved with BYU's offense values are guys who know how to get themselves open. For example, look at Chase Roberts. Chase Roberts has that elite size, 6'3", 6'4", 200 plus pounds, but maybe runs a tad bit slower than what you would like as a wide receiver. How does he find himself so open so often? He runs impeccable routes. His timing, his ability to get off on the brakes, everything that Chase Roberts does makes himself available to his quarterback. That's what I see from a guy like Terrence Sarion. Now, the size factor alone indicates that he's more in the mold of a Parker Kingston or harkening a little further back and not too distant pass for BYU, a guy like Aleva Hifo. They're more similar size to Terrence Sarion, but I think Terrence, in and of himself, he's not the same as either one of those guys. I will just say this. I love Parker Kingston. He's about as explosive as an athlete as you're going to see because he's got that game-breaking speed that I think Terrence may lack. But the one thing is, a guy like Parker came out of Roy High School and had played a bevy of different positions, and maybe he wasn't as polished a wide receiver as Terrence Sarion already is coming into BYU. That's why I got like Terrence Sarion with guys like Chase Roberts figuring to exit the program after this upcoming season. Probably look at the depth chart for BYU and say, okay, there's talent there. There's no reason to think I can't step in and immediately contribute day one for the BYU football program. That's what I love about a guy like this that flips from Washington, from his hometown school, to use that expression, and decides, you know what? I'm going to go a little further from home. I'm going to go play in the Big 12. I could easily play in the Big 10. And obviously with Washington and their travel schedule, have to travel across the country a whole lot more than BYU is likely to make me travel. But I want to go prove myself at a place that may be a little bit unfamiliar to me, but I also believe that I can go in there and compete right away and really stand out. That's the other thing about this is I think that BYU sold a guy like Terrence Sarion on what their vision for him is as a wide receiver. They said, hey, you look at a guy like, you can probably pull up Aleva Hifo highlights and show him, you're going to be a guy who's going to be running end arounds for us and those fly sweeps, because that's something he also shows on his highlight reel. Speaking of Sarion, is the ability to take the ball in space and make plays, and he's got some wiggle to him, to use that expression that a lot of the analysts like to use. Wiggle, that's a great name. A great moniker, I should say. The other thing is, he has got, I said, that advanced route running ability already as a high school senior. Last year, he had over 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns in 10 games. That's incredible in terms of the overall stats. And you flip on his huddle highlights, and all you see is a guy who's making plays. And the best part is it's not just all go routes. We're talking posts. We're talking skinny posts. We're talking in-breaking routes, out-breaking routes. And his timing and his ability to get out, in and out of his breaks make himself almost unguardable for opposing defensive backs at the high school level. How will that translate over to the college level? Well, BYU believes it will translate very, very well, and they believe in him enough that they obviously flipped him from Washington to get him to play in Provo, Utah. So I really do think that this is a really, really solid pickup, and he, alongside a guy like Legend Glasgow, who committed not too long ago for BYU as wide receiver prospects, those are two guys that I like to call dogs. They like to get after it on the football field. You can tell they love honing their craft, working on it, being the best players they can be. And let's say they do pull off adding Keenan and Jaron Pula along the way. The makings of BYU's 2026 class are already, we're talking incredible. We're talking one of the all-time, if not the all-time recruiting class in BYU football history, at least on paper. If these things keep trending the way that they are for 2026, and the more momentum you build on the recruiting trail, guess what? More and more guys are going to be inclined to say, hey, BYU may be a place I want to look at a little bit closer, because guys like Terrence Sarion, Brock Harris, let's say the Pula twins commit. They also look at going back to the 2025 class, a 4-star prospect like McCabe Madsen, much like Sarion, had offers from the likes of Oregon and Washington, decided BYU is where he wanted to be. A lot of prospects will look a little closer and say, okay, what has BYU got here that I'm missing out on? And that's a really nice in for BYU to have. And the hope is that these 7-on-7 relationships that Sarion and Brock Harris have will continue to pay dividends down the line with the likes of the Pula twins, adding to BYU's already strong 2026 class that still got a long way to go. We haven't even entered June, which could be a pivotal month for BYU, with a number of 4- and 5-star prospects making official visits. They're already off to an incredible start in 2026, and it could get a whole lot brighter as the coming days and weeks progress. All right, we'll finish up today's show. Coming up next, more on a national level. We have got reports that the House settlement is almost done. Now, we've been waiting for, I don't know, I feel it's like 4 years for the House settlement to finally be locked in. There's been two key developments very late in this process that can completely reshape how college sports look and how they feel as soon as this fall. And we'll explain what exactly they are next. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Hope you all are doing fantastic out there. If you have not done so already, what are you waiting for? Sign up for the Locked On Cougars Insider Group and get the inside scoop on all things BYU sports. And the best part is it's just $5 a month to be a part of the group. And you also get a 14-day free trial, 2 full weeks, half a month to see if it's the right option for you guys. Click the link in the show notes below. Join us today and be a part of the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right. Before we go on today's show, reading up on the House settlement, because it really is a big deal in the college sports universe. Everything kind of rides on if Judge Claudia Wilkin out there in Oakland, California is going to finally put the rubber stamp on the House settlement and agree to the terms as it stands. Well, as we continue to wait for that, because the reports come out, I think it was Pete Thamel who said that there was expecting to be resolution this week on the House settlement. The bigger point is that there are two key developments here from himself as well as Ross Dellinger that could really change the feel of college sports. And we've already seen the professionalization of college football really underway, and it's continuing to just kind of take off at an astronomical rate. Well, you want to talk about one major change that could be coming in this is that they're going to create a CEO of what they're calling the College Sports Commission, which would be empowered to have, quote, the final say in doling out punishments and deciding when rules have been violated, according to sources, a level of singular power that never existed during the NCAA's era of struggling to enforce its rules, unquote. That comes from the Pete Thamel report on ESPN.com. This CEO is, in fact, going to be essentially what Roger Goodell is for the NFL, what Rob Manfred is for Major League Baseball, what Adam Silver is for the NBA on down the line, a commissioner of college football. You want to talk about the professionalization of this sport? Yeah, let's get commissioners involved who are judge, jury, and executioner here. That's the other thing about this. This CEO, by the way, is expected to be hired quickly after the House settlement is finalized and is spearheaded by the 4 commissioners from the SEC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the ACC. So Brett Yormark is among those who are helping hire this person. And this person is supposed to be installed by the time that the House settlement is supposed to take effect, which is, by the way, July 1st. We're less than a month and a half away from all this taking place. And they're going to have this person who's probably going to make 7 figures in place. They're going to empower them to enforce the rules that the House settlement is going to install in high-level college football. And also, it is going to make essentially a new pact here. As Ross Dellinger points out, that the power conferences have drafted a contract. Ooh, we love contracts, baby. Legalese. You know what's undefeated in college sports? Legal fees and lawyers. Their billable hours are always undefeated. But they say this contract would bind schools to the new enforcement rules in college football and require them to waive the right to sue over decisions, sources tell Yahoo Sports, who Ross Dellinger writes for. Schools not signing may risk conference eviction. In other words, they are threatening to kick you out of your conference if you do not sign on the dotted line that say, hey, you are waiving the right to challenge us on the rulings we make on your behalf, or when you run when you run afoul of the rules that we have here. They also say this: the document described as a, quote, affiliation or, quote, membership agreement is not finalized, but a draft of the contract has been distributed to dozens of school presidents, general counsel, and athletic directors, some of whom have pushed back against some of the concepts, which are now being refined. Yeah. Try kicking us out of the Power Four. That's one of the things I'm sure they pushed back on. It also says this: the document is meant to be signed by all 70-plus Power Conference schools, as well as others opting into the settlement, as a way to bind the group and provide stability around the enforcement of rules, including, quote, NIL Go, which is the clearinghouse, which is obviously going to regulate NIL payments and the like, and the LBI cap management system, which is supposed to help manage the $20.5 million revenue share from these schools. Your head's probably spinning at this point, but understand this, everybody. There are multiple state laws, including Tennessee, that has an NIL law on its books that say that anything the NCAA or college football try to do is superseded by state law in the state of Tennessee, and they can do whatever they want with regards to NIL, and nobody can challenge that. Now college football is turning around and trying to get Tennessee, as well as the other power conference schools, including your beloved BYU Cougars, to sign away their rights. In essence, from my vantage point, and I'm not a legal expert, but this screams to me, this is the way of NCAA getting essentially an antitrust agreement without, actually an antitrust agreement from the federal government, which they have sought. They have obviously talked to the House of Representatives and the Senate, and there have been proposals on both floors of Congress, or both houses of Congress, or in both houses of Congress, to use the right term, about this, but no traction has been made on the national level. We have a hodgepodge of state laws. BYU is in the state of Utah, obviously, and other states around the union have different laws in effect that either, in some cases, allow schools to directly pay their athletes, much like Tennessee's law allows. They allow the schools to pay their athletes directly. That's just what the law says. There are other laws in other states that say you can't do that. What does this all sound like to you guys that are still with me here? This sounds a whole lot like there's going to be a whole lot of lawsuits. There's going to be a whole lot of lawyers continuing to make a lot of money with their billable hours, and legal challenges are absolutely afoot here. You are asking member schools to bind themselves to an agreement to play by the rules in a sport and in a college environment that for decades, going back to the very earliest days of college football, that very few have actually played by the rules. The stories of bagmen, the stories of athletes switching alliances in the early days of college football on a whim, all of that has been going on for decades, if not centuries at this point. And you expect right now in 2025, in the next, let's say, month and a half ahead of the House settlement taking effect on July 1, you expect all these high-level programs with hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars under their control with regards to media rights and the like, to sign on a dotted line that says, hey, yeah, we're going to play by the rules here. Good luck. I will say this in defense of BYU. BYU, they will play by the rules. They will play by whatever rules of the game are. And that's actually irked some people, because when the rules changed and actually advantaged BYU, all of a sudden allegations of tampering came about by other fan bases. The rules being what they are, BYU will always abide by them. That's something that BYU has been very, very clear about from the get-go when it came to this NIL era. But you can't tell me that the SEC, the Big Ten, ACC, and other Big 12 schools are going to look at those rules, say, you know what? Yeah, we're totally okay with this. Let's sign on right away. Good luck with that. I just don't see it happening, because it doesn't feel like it is in anybody's best interest to just sign off and sign away essentially your rights to control your future. And that's the other thing about this. General counsels, these schools themselves, they are going to fight this tooth and nail, because they want to still control what they can control. And what you can do that is they keep the legal option in your back pocket to take it to the courts if it doesn't go in your favor. I think this is going to be a very, very hard sell for the NCAA to make. And if they pull it off, more power to them. But at the same time, I do not see this going the way that they envision it going, but maybe it does. And maybe everybody starts to get along and it's all hunky-dory, and maybe everybody does play by the rules, but history suggests otherwise. So stay tuned. Should be a very interesting deal. You know what I just noticed doing this? I did not change the rundown of today's show. So you got yesterday's rundown. If you're watching this on YouTube, probably going, hey, this says this about BYU's good team to bet the over on. What Big 12 revenue's down? It's stuff from yesterday. So if you're an everydayer, go back and watch the podcast. If you missed it yesterday, I'll actually throw up the new rundown while we're doing this live. But that was a faux pas on my part. I've done it from time to time here, but I caught it, in the final 30 seconds of the show. So give me some credit. But as always, a big thank you to all of you guys for your support of the podcast. Truthfully, you guys are what makes this go around, makes it worth my while to do this literally every single day. And as always, continue to subscribe, rate, review, share the show with your family and friends, spread the good word about this podcast. It's on-demand BYU content whenever you want it on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And once again, as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And once again, also, thank you to all of you who are everydayers right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.